So, hi, everybody. Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today, we're going to continue our discussion about negativity, positivity, neutrality, and the toxic versions of each therein. Well, while I was waiting for today's call to come up to the hour, I started drawing up a diagram, and this is what I'm at, where I'm at on the whole thing. I don't think it's particularly accurate, but I thought it's a good place to kind of start from. Last time around, we did talk about positivity, and we talked about the 4 different faces of positivity. So let me go back to that for just a second. Pardon the jets if you can hear them. It's a cloudy day, and so that's a big training day for the airbase here. We have very few cloudy days. Very few cloudy days. So so this is where we're at. We talked about the neurochemistry of positivity and the 4 faces of positivity. And by that, what we meant is that there's a different face that positivity has if you're in a driver kind of mode. And that's different than if you were an expressive kind of a mode. And that's different if you were in the amiable energy. And it's different if you were down in the analytical kind of energy. You can even go in between. If you were partway between driver and expressive, one of the layers of the change grid would tell you, just one second, let's see if I've got it somewhere in our massive stack of slides, but you guys know some personality typing systems insist that there are 4 types. And in the next paragraph, they say, but if you're on the border between those types, then here's what that's all about. So it's like, well, isn't that an 8th type now? So did we never talk about that? Scroll back, scroll back. Scroll back. You can all chat amongst yourselves while I search for this. Interesting. You know, it's got to be here. Why would I have avoided talking about one particular layer? Oh, well, I'll find it as soon as we're done with the call, but I'll show it to you next week. But just think about this for a second. If you were a very expressive kind of person and you were also a very driven kind of person, and you lived in this in-between world, what's a driven, expressive driver really all about? Well, one of the models refers to that as being the motivator. And so this is a person who has an agenda, that's the driver energy, but they're trying to get you to where you're going by being very inspiring and energizing and all that. So they called that the motivator. And then if you were halfway between driver and analytical, this is where you were, I believe their word was the reformer, because it's not enough for you to just know something. That driver energy tries to stimulate you to get involved a little bit. And so, you know, the reformer energy is all about, pardon me, telling you that something, the data shows that something really needs to be looked at. And if you did look at it, great things would happen. So we need to do a little bit of reformation of whatever our beliefs were and our behaviors that came as a result of that. I'm throwing these 2 out just so I could say that both of those also have kind of like a positive energy around it. One is about the positive energy around change. Well, in fact, the motivator is also a positive energy around change, but one's more data driven and the other one is just more, what do we say, heart driven, inspiring, things like that. And if we worked our way around the other 2 sides, we'd find that as well. And so as I started thinking about that, I went, so really, positivity is something that maps out as a bit of a circle. So a bit of a, you know, we talked about radial trends on the change grid. It has a radial kind of an element to it. Depending on where you are in that radial trend, things may express themselves differently, but nevertheless, the underlying energy could be described as one that's positive, at least in its intention. And this certainly resonates with what we were talking about before, about how negativity, while we tend to look at it as only being at the extremes, I think that if we saw it in radial trends, we could certainly see that it would continue as well. So I'm babbling a little bit, but I just wanted to set the ground for this diagram that I want to show you. Pardon all the scrolling over on the side, but we really have done quite a bit of conversation on these subjects. Good grief, what number are we up to? 159. So anyway, as I started thinking about that, I went, well, if it's true that they travel as radial trends, I wonder if this is what's really going on. And so, way in the danger zones, we might find toxic negativity. And obviously, that band would travel through a lot of nothing as well. I don't quite know how to describe nothingness. Then, negativity would be a slightly healthier kind of thing. And then we come into the positive range. And I believe there's also a bit of a toxic positivity. And then we'll talk about neutrality later. But yeah, so positivity is a bit of a radial trend. So today I wanted to start by exploring, what do you think toxic positivity is? Anybody want to give a bit of a definition for toxic positivity, or how you might characterize it as different than positivity?
Someone who always sees the bright side in everything.
They always see the bright side in things. I could build the case that positive people see the bright side as well. What might make it toxic?
They refuse to acknowledge any negative.
They refuse to acknowledge any negative. And so, building on what Tim said, if they are always seeing the positive side, and but the positive side is what they can give evidence of, okay, that sounds more like positivity. But if their focus on the positive elements of things are either ignoring, diminishing, or denouncing any negative element that might be going on in the environment, I might say that feels a little bit toxic. You guys agree with that? Disagree with that? What do you think?
Yeah. I think patients, sometimes they'll say something like, "Oh, it'll be okay." I'm like, you have a serious condition. It
right?
May be okay, but there's some things that need to take place. But you have a serious condition.
That's right. You have a growth the size of a lime. How can you say you're okay? So, yeah. Right. So I think that this is it. So last time around, we said, well, a lot of times what toxic positivity really is a coping mechanism that is trying to somehow or another protect you, insulate you from the negativity. So what would you guys say if I said toxic positivity is actually a form of negativity? More so that it's a form of positivity. I don't know. I'm throwing it out there. Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense because of the term toxic. Anything taken to the extreme in that way becomes a negative because it eliminates other options.
Yeah.
Now, someone brought up the question, toxic to whom? So, toxin's a poison. That means it's going to have some sort of adverse effect, if not a deadly effect, on somebody. So who do you think, if we go back to toxic negativity versus toxic positivity, is the object of the toxin or changing, or is it still could be hurting anybody and everybody?
I think it hurts anyone. It hurts the person who holds it because of a potential blind spot, but it also impacts the people around them because they don't have an opportunity to voice or air or explore an alternative.
Yeah.
Could we say that toxic positivity ignores reality?
I certainly believe it ignores aspects of reality. Absolutely. Because what they might be pointing out as being positive could certainly be true. But this selective omission, selective denial of fact, of reality, that's where it starts to become problematic, however that expresses itself.
What was that we were talking about before, where I think it was something from NLP where you said distort, delete,
and generalize? Yeah. It actually comes from linguistics, and then people in our field seem to know about it because of neurolinguistic programming. But if you just took a regular course in linguistics, they would tell you that one of the challenges with verbal communication is that in order for anyone to communicate just about anything verbally, they have to generalize a vast amount of information. They have to delete vast amounts of information. They have to distort things. Otherwise, they would have to include every single aspect of every single thing they said, which would make communication impossible. So if I said I'm having a good day, am I generalizing? Or am I distorting? Am I deleting? I mean, can you guys kind of hear? Like, saying anything never tells the whole story. Mm-hmm. Right? But without deleting, distorting, or generalizing, how could we begin to communicate? In fact, do you guys want to listen to someone who doesn't delete, distort, and generalize? I mean, who's got that time? So, mind you, if you're charging them hourly, okay, it's their time. All right, yeah, go ahead. Joseph.
I would like to, yes, this is Joseph. I would like to circle back to the idea of toxic positivity and toxic negativity.
Yes.
It sounds a little bit like dysfunction, like denying reality or not accepting reality.
Yeah.
But what do you think about if you would deliberately like ignore some negativity?
Oh, now we're getting to a very interesting way of looking about this, and that is, what do you think is the likelihood that anybody would ever do these things deliberately? And if they are doing these things deliberately, what might their motivation or intention be behind it? So right now we're just talking about these as being states that someone might find themselves in, or moments they might be experiencing at the individual level. But let's say, oh, no, this isn't about happenstance. This isn't circumstantial. Instead, we're saying, no, someone has come along and said, I am going to deliberately display positivity, toxic positivity, negativity, toxic negativity. I'm going to do it on purpose. Why might they be doing that? Yeah, go ahead, Joseph.
All the time. People do it all the time. I mean, our public figures do that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do it daily in a way of self-coaching. I mean, when I feel that I'm in stress, I want to move myself downgrade. So that I don't have to keep struggling with some issue until I'm ready in power.
Yeah. Now, as you've described it there, now it feels like it's more of a change grid maneuver, more of a technique for self-management. And, you know, our languages are filled with phrases like, well, look on the bright side. You know, if you're having kind of a downer day, look about all the great things that are going on, you know, so find the silver lining in the cloud. And I think that from a certain angle, those are very, very useful, beneficial ways to move oneself out of a mindset that isn't really serving you well and into perhaps a happier mindset. Now, let me throw in some neurochemistry to all this, or some brain science into this whole thing. Brian, isn't what we're doing moving ourselves out of the limbic system whenever we're saying, like, look on the brighter side of things or find the silver lining in the cloud? You know, isn't that more a bit of a buffalo maneuver?
You're moving in that direction. You're using what the ACC is, your cingulate cortex. And so that's the part that helps us to mediate between so-called good and bad, or what we can drive some value out of. And that's that toggle switch, if you will, that Diane's always talking about. If you can navigate that, and that's just like a muscle, like anything else, right? You can train to do it.
Yeah.
But when someone is in toxic positivity and or toxic negativity, I would almost think that's like they're unaware. Because kind of like, who gets up in the morning and say like, today would be a great day to have inflammation in my body,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
or to experience inflammation. I don't know anyone who does that deliberately, because it almost seems like your body and the nervous system by design would not want that. That's what the nervous system helps us to do, that
Yeah.
interoception, right? It keeps things calm. So I can't see us doing that strategically on purpose unless you have some significant damage.
Right. I would say to you that the further away we move from the center of the change grid, the less able we become to do our own interventions, our own management, particularly if we're talking about upgrid, because by definition, upgrid is saying, I know I'm out of control. I have no ability. The challenge is extremely high. So I can certainly see how that would kind of put me into a state that I am maybe very likely unable to do anything to help myself in that moment.
Right.
So I may need an intervention, but I do believe as we move into the increasingly inner rings, our ability to self-manage increases. And I guess I could say, do you think someone who is of a negative energy is more or less able to self-manage than someone who's in a positive energy?
Yeah, I think you can manage it in negativity, but for me, the key is that awareness, right? Because I said that in the last call, the idea that comes to mind to me is whenever you talk about any kind of self-management, you're really talking about managing your nervous system, because there's some sensations and different things that you just have to be aware of. So, and there's some non-negotiables and negotiables. When we talk about how the body processes sensations, that's non-negotiable. You're not going to detract that. That's why when I hear people say, stave off stress, that in and of itself is nonsense, because the sensations and how it's processed, there's nothing that you can do. It's connected to the autonomous nervous system. Auto is the key word there. It doesn't require any bidding from you. So now when it comes to thoughts and emotion in terms of how we classify feelings, now we can start to regulate that, but it requires that awareness.
Right. And so if I am in an extremely high stress state and I am not someone who has the tools to do any kind of self-intervention, self-management, and I have no one in my immediate surroundings who can help me do that, in all likelihood, I'm going to remain in that extremely stressed out state.
I would think so.
Yeah. Now, to kind of build on that, going back to what Joseph was saying, if we don't do something to kind of modify ourselves or manage ourselves more effectively, the brain is going to supply whatever content is missing in order to support whatever it is we're feeling. So Brian, tell me if I'm wrong, but if I'm feeling stressed out and there's really no reason for me to be stressed out, the fact that I'm in a stressed state will trigger my brain to find plenty of good reasons for me to stay there.
Exactly. It's always looking for a match.
It's always looking, right. It's always looking. And that's why I remember back in the days of when I took the Dale Carnegie course long ago, and I forget when the Dale Carnegie course first came on the market. It was probably the what do you think, the 40s, earlier, the 50s? I don't remember, but it's been around for a very, very long time. Well, one of the things, and this is long before neuroscience had, I'm sure someone was doing it, but it wasn't there wasn't the level of awareness there is around the value of neuroscience as there is today. But anyway, one of the things Dale Carnegie said was that if you act enthusiastic, you'll be enthusiastic. Mm-hmm. So he never said fake it till you make it, but that's kind of like one of the things that came along. He said, look, if you put a smile on your face and you just force that smile and open up your eyes and, move around a little bit and act enthusiastic, it won't take very many seconds before you're not acting anymore. Right. And now we know it's because those kinds of behaviors do trigger the release of certain neurotransmitters or neurochemicals that then make that artificial state more of a legit one. Is that correct, Brian? And whoever else are
Absolutely.
by?
And that's what we tend to, or try to. That's why you need the consistency, and you build or scaffold those behaviors into your experience. Because again, when we talk about interoception, which is what the nervous system is responsible for, it's always looking for to match an external state with an internal state, right? So sensations, if you think about what is surveying, sensations, and so like I said, that's non-negotiable. Perceptions, your feelings, your thoughts, your behaviors, and your actions, all of that is negotiable. So once we get the sensation, then we're like, oh, okay, if we don't have the tools to say, why am I triggered? Why am I this? Then we can't move from limbic to cognition and effectively apply, greater use or the most effective use of this, what the nervous system is picking up on. And that becomes a skill set. And that's why I like this conversation.
Yep. So, all right. Well, I think, everything we've talked about right now seems to be about how this applies to moving someone out of stress, but let's kind of add an element to it. Now, because I depicted this as being these concentric circles stacked upon one another, you guys do know the toxic negativity fills this entire arc, right? This entire, whatever you call a circle inside of a circle. Yeah. So I don't need to take the set of words and rotate them for me to say, let's look at what's happening out grid instead. Here we have toxic negativity. This would be where negativity, and again, I mean, I'm being very arbitrary about this whole thing. I got no idea. I'm just of the belief right now that these things kind of happen on a continuum, and the continuum radiates from the center of the change grid outward in all directions. I'm more than happy to debate that or toss that aside if you've got another thing to look at. But then, all right, so this would be negativity, toxic positivity. Positivity, toxic neutrality, and neutrality. So let's just look at them going horizontally. And by the way, there's no reason at all for me to hold any sort of a belief that the toxic versions are equal in width to the healthier ones. It could very well be the toxicity is a very narrow kind of a band, and the general negativity, general positivity is a much wider kind of a band. I'm just saying that somewhere along this continuum, we're going to encounter a possibility of toxic positivity coming into play, then getting into negativity, then toxic negativity. So does that fit for everybody? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think it's going to change.
Yeah, I think it is going to change.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that exactly what David talked about. I think, again, from a nervous system perspective, you build up that. And so you train your system where synaptically it becomes even stronger. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine it starts with a narrow band and grows. You just make it kind of like, you hear people say it, hey, this is just the way I am.
Yep. And, we've shared before, we have people we know that are truly live in a state of toxic negativity. Well, I believe that wasn't just like a temporary thing. I think over a period of life experience, spending enough time in toxic negativity, I like your idea about expands the width of that arc, or that, whatever you would call it, circle. I don't know. What do you call the gap between two circles? There's got to be a name for it. So whatever that is, I think that some people can train them to be much wider, much more prevalent, much more pronounced than others. And, the way we've depicted this, we're saying, like, look, let's say that we are, you guys, just for a moment, just be you. Don't think about any client or anything like that. Just be you. You may very well find yourself in a situation where you're feeling upgrid and positive. So something interesting is happening, something engaging is going on, something that with a little bit of enthusiasm is going on. But then you start to see, oh, wait. No, there's issues around this. Well, this would imply that as you start to notice there are issues that could complicate this situation, raise your tension around it, do you think that even for a passing moment, you go through a period where you are sticking with the positives and kind of gently denying the negatives or wishing they weren't there? You know, so do you go through this, even though it might be a fleeting moment, where you are, yeah, kind of pretending those aren't there quite yet, but then you go like, nah, they're there. And now you're up into the negativity. But even though you're up to the negativity, again, you're upgrade, so you don't have the ability to do anything about it. But now you're recognizing, no, these are problems. And so you try to do whatever you can do to deal with that issue. Again, I don't think that anyone who's in a toxic negativity situation this far upgrade is very long for the world, because again, this far upgrade, you really are in harm's way. Thoughts about this idea? Do you think we all do this little progression? Like when we're in our positive mode and we start to identify some negativity, do we try our best to, at least for a fleeting moment, go, nah.
Yes, I think so. I know I've done it on teams in the startup world, and these guys just wanted to kill it. And I'm like, okay, I don't mind killing it, but let's be concerned about how we're going about business. Unless you just want a one-time customer, then you're going to have to play a game of one-upmanship. And so work with those kinds of so-called type A personalities does not, that's where I discovered it doesn't fit me.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought up the whole, like, oh, thank you. Joseph says that what we call this is a ring. Here I was going for some. I love it. We're talking to the guy who speaks English as a second language. Oh, it's hysterical.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Oh, it's so perfect. Perfect. Exactly. It's a ring. Oh my. Okay, thank you. All right, let's go ahead, because Brian brought up A personalities. A personalities tend to live more outgrid. So let's rotate this whole bunch of identifiers so we're looking more outgrid. So now we're someone who's a driver. And obviously the driver will assume for a second they started in the middle, and then they realized, oh, there's an opportunity of some sort, something needs to be taken care of. And they were quite positive about the whole thing. They start working their way down whatever that road is. And then people start to bring things to their attention that are raising the level of challenge, but they're saying, no, we still have the ability to do that. Or they're kind of, again, diminishing that that threat exists, that the competitor is present. That the tax laws don't apply or whatever it is. So I can kind of see how, as people are naturally moving out grid, that there's a positive energy that's driving it initially. Then reality starts to creep in and they recognize this is not without challenge. This is not without hurdles that must be overcome. Will that person, that driver energy, want to deny, diminish, set aside, ignore whatever those challenges happen to be until they have no choice but to acknowledge them? Would you guys consider that be a normal progression?
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about entrepreneurial behavior.
I hate to break it, but there's a whole culture around it.
Well,
stay hungry, stay foolish. I mean, it's a legendary phrase, but it's actually feeding into that.
It's very much feeding into it. Yeah, that, or we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, or if that happens, then we'll deal with it. So this is kind of like not denying them, but it's definitely diminishing them and saying, we're better than they are. We've got everything. We got the better team. We got the better whatever. And so I kind of recognize that toxic positivity is there. I'm having a little bit of a problem with how I'm feeling the word toxic. But let's just say that, okay, my background is in environmental toxicology. That's what I studied. I worked for the Poison Control Center. You guys know all this about me. So I know that toxic is a whole range of responses. That toxic does not necessarily mean deadly. In order for a toxin to be powerful enough to actually kill somebody, it has to be present at a certain level. And if it isn't that at that level, it can still make you sick. It can still make you miserable. So let's just talk about being intoxicated. So intoxicated contains the word toxic. Why is that? Because alcohol is what?
Poisonous.
It's poisonous. Alcohol is poisonous. Now, if you are, now that could be an outgrid or an upgrade experience, but there's a lot of people who'll be drinking and they're having fun. The inhibitions are down. These early stage symptoms of the toxicity of alcohol tend to be viewed as a positive experience by a great many people. Unfortunately, it also reduces judgment. And so the person starts to think they can have more, and more will be better than whatever they've just had. And so now I think we're starting to get into a bit of toxic positivity, quite literally. They're thinking that if a little bit will get you a good buzz going and, let you have a little bit of fun at the party, then a lot more will be even better. And so I can even see how that's happening. That ultimately negativity, now you're drunk, so you may not even notice that you've now ingested a truly physically toxic level of alcohol, and you could be having all kinds of things. So depression of central nervous system functions, woe be unto you if you pass out and then end up throwing up in an unconscious state. So all kinds of terrible things happen that are out there. But I think that even if we look about the process of someone drinking too much, that they could very well go through these kind of.
Would you think that these like going back to like this Great Resignation, they have all different kinds of names for it right now, but thinking about the culture of organizations, those who stay in these cultures that are toxic and they're using positive language to simply tolerate things, is that like, because like I'm thinking like whistleblowers, all these kinds of things come out of that, right?
Yeah. Well, and talking about why would people stay in a truly negative place, and kind of justify their presence there by focusing only on the positive elements. If we look at an abusive relationship, that's something that's very characteristic, belief held very commonly by the victim. So they find some way of justifying the abuse that the other person is perpetrating on them. So it's the same thing. They're in a toxic culture, a negative toxic culture, but the people that are there somehow justify staying within it because they're really not breaking the laws, or they're really not hurting anybody, or they're really, so you start to wonder who is the victim of this toxin. And as Kathy pointed out, it's very likely everybody who is involved or touched by whatever the toxin happens to be. So, thoughts about this, or have you guys seen plenty of evidence of this in an entrepreneurial and outgrid kind of way? Yeah.
I've certainly seen it in major corporations, and I've seen it in relationships. It's just an unwillingness to make a change because it's such a difficult thing to do. And then there's justification. Like you were saying, an abusive relationship, only people don't use that terminology in organizations, but it actually is a very similar phenomenon.
Absolutely. Now, going to what Joseph pointed out, or at least he stimulated, was what if someone's doing it intentionally? So can you think of someone who, as they start to move outgrid, they want to be controlling, they're the driver, they want to accomplish, they want to get to wherever it is they want to go. Might they deliberately create a toxic positivity mindset in others?
Can I react?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
I think it comes from a place of wanting to motivate others. I mean, when I was in the early stage of my career, I had a team manager who lied about the sales figures of my colleagues, so I would perform harder.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so that's particularly true for people that are in A-type occupations like competitive sales. I remember the days where the sales manager was always going to be questioning your ability just because they knew that as an A-type personality, you would rise to the occasion to prove them wrong. In which case you sold more and they're happy. So
Yeah, right.
it can be used very much as a tool for manipulating others. We do find this not only in business, we find this also in a lot of political kinds of things that be going on. If someone can do their best to just diminish the negative elements of something, focus entirely on the positives, and get enough people to adopt that same mindset, well, now who brought it up in saying like delusion is starting to come into play, and then maybe that then move everyone into the negativity that now we've got an angry mob to work with, and then they become toxic negativity. It starts to be pervasive and permanent and all those sorts of things from Seligman's work.
Is that the tribalism?
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Brian, and then Tim.
The tribalism?
Tribalism, yeah. If we go back to spiral dynamics, this was most definitely present, or this progression might very well be present as each trip up the spiral happened. Yeah, because somewhere along the line, I mean, what we'd be saying is that the remedy for toxic negativity is to condition them to work their way backwards, or get them to cultivate neutrality. Start again, start from a new place. Or maybe that's it. If we're in an environment where, like right now, I feel very much like, at least in the US, we've got two different camps that are both heavily toxic in their negativity. Two very big extremes. Why do I think that the answer is to find the middle? And that's to find that neutral zone. Tim, go right ahead. You're our resident mediator.
Well, you had asked the question about intentionality, and it caused me to automatically think about those leaders and team members that are projecting into the environment on an unconscious basis. And, because I've seen that so much. And so they are just clueless as to how they are impacting employee morale, employee engagement, contributions. And so to me, that just really gets into a danger zone.
Yeah, and that is also something that, if you wanted to throw this concept into a leadership training program, can you imagine if you've called together a meeting of all the brightest minds in your company and presented a new idea to them, and, you as the leader for it are out there being positive, and moving people into here, and we got some real analytical types sitting at the table going like, yeah, but what about blah, blah, blah? I can definitely see them getting shut down in the moment or during a meeting after the meeting. And so, because they're trying to just say, wait, there are issues, but they're coming up against toxic positivity. And unfortunately, what does that do to the people who come to meetings who want to play or feel it is beneficial to play the devil's advocate, feel that it is necessary to bring up certain things that people may not be aware of or are choosing to diminish or deny?
And, T, I see that in this diversity work that I do, particularly when folks are trying to share experiences that are uncomfortable experiences, and someone will immediately divert or interject something on a positive note to try and move the energy in a different direction, and the message that it winds up sending to the person who is trying to share that difficult experience, they just sometimes it shuts them down, or it confirms for them that the environment is not inclusive.
And so they will either shut down or leave. I mean, they could also fight. They could also just continue through that, which is probably the best thing to happen. But how likely is this person who's being toxic positive or toxic negativity? Because sometimes the analytical types will also come along and say to the person who's toxic negativity, yeah, but there's plenty of positive elements that are going on as well.
Yes.
So that voice of the opposite tends to be where the real conflicts come into play. All right, so are you guys finding this interesting, at least, if it's not useful in some?
See, I keep relating this toxic positivity to the sales field and sales management, and the reality that positivity would say we're going to have 3% organic growth this year, and toxic positivity is stuck on 9%.
Yep.
And they won't see the reality. Now, I mean, there's a pull, there's a tug there.
Yep, exactly right. And I'm thinking now the tug could actually be happening in either direction.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
You've got those who want to defend mediocrity, and you've got those that are committed to excellence, and those value systems, really make it a difficult conversation.
Yeah. I remember at some point we were talking about the world of positive psychology, and someone was actually saying that as they were working for an organization who brought in positive psychology training and were trying to apply it to decision making. And interestingly enough, if you actually go back to Seligman's writings, he would tell you that this is not a methodology for problem solving, but they insisted on doing it. But they were, as an organization, people were forbidden to bring up anything negative. So even logical negative assessment, nope. If it could in any way be interpreted as negative, it was deemed not only counterproductive to bring it into play, but on the border of evil to bring it into play. And so can you imagine the quality of decision making that happens when people have no appreciation for the presence of challenges or things that, Yeah.
See, is this the downside of the law of attraction movement? I mean,
well, yeah, I mean, that's a part of the whole thing. If you guys read the Gift or many of the other books that came out when that was having its last resurgence in popularity, there does come this belief that if you completely eliminate negativity from your life, you'll have a better life. And I've often wondered if that was brought up because the person or the culture had moved into a profoundly negative mode, and they were trying to get the pendulum to swing to the other extreme or the other direction at least, and felt that they had to do something extreme to make that happen. I'm just a very big believer that the answer is in the middle. And both extremes are equally problematic. So yeah. And again, you got to keep in mind, all of us for that matter, it's part of our industry. You want to sell books, you want to sell programs, you want to sell speaking engagements, you need to recognize when an extreme is happening. And in the early stage of the extreme, if you want to just make money, then you want to emphasize the extreme. And if the extreme has been going on for a while and it's time for the pendulum to swing, you want to position yourself as having a way to counteract that or counterbalance whatever it is that was being put forth. But we could talk about the moral and ethical aspects of that. But nevertheless,
I would say thank you for the tip, T.
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying. It's like, if all you really want to do is make money at the early stage, emphasize, and at the late stage, put forth whatever the correction would be. But,
it's not real.
Well, it's equally flawed. It's just different. But the world might be ripe for buying different. And I get that. I get that. So that's why even, you know, if I'm watching the news, which is becoming increasingly pointless, you just have to realize, okay, am I listening to someone who's emphasizing the current extreme or who's trying to pitch the resolution to it? I don't even know. More than anything, I want to know the motivation behind whatever's being put forth before I even listen to what's being put forth. Because, you know, it's going to change the way that it's all being interpreted, integrated, etc. So like right now, ooh, let's take the emphasis off of our own country. Let's talk to Joseph. Joseph, we've been seeing lots of reports about all kinds of rioting, kind of protesting activities happening in the Netherlands because of forced lockdowns, forced vaccination. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in the Netherlands.
Well, my analysis is quite simple. It's like it's not really connected, not caused by the lockdown or the message around lockdown, but actually it is a trigger event for a problem that was already there. So it's like the riots in the US. I think only very much smaller. It's not so. I mean, we had this in the 80s and the early years, so it's not so. I'm not so panicked. I mean, I'm still standing here.
Well, right. And you're not going out in the middle of the night to check out.
It could be fun, but
yeah, no. Yeah, did you? There you go. So,
well, in my younger years.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, you know, my point is like whenever you've got any kind of a situation like going on, messages are being delivered. Different messages are being delivered and received by different segments of the population. And let's say that there's a messenger out there who's all about toxic negativity, and someone else is just negative, and someone who's toxic positivity, and someone who's positive. I mean, we haven't talked about neutrality yet, but we'll get there as well. It also has its own kind of problem. But you can imagine these four different messages can all be being delivered to the general population, but only a certain portion of that population is going to find a home. Who was talking about tribal mentality? Was that Brian you brought up, tribal? Yeah, so maybe that there's a tribe out there whose toxic negativity is what their t-shirts say. And another one that's just negative, toxic positivity, neutrality. These are all present in all populations on all issues at all times. And we've got people moving from one to another because everyone is trying to influence the others. And at a certain point in time, you wonder, are we still talking about the issue? Or are we all does the toxic positivity camp have a very different issue at the core of what they're doing versus the negative camp versus the toxic negative camp? I got to believe they have different belief systems, and whatever that core belief is going to be different. So in fact, Joseph, you said it's not even so much the lockdown that's at the core of what's going on. So what is at the core of what's going on?
Yeah, like alienation, I think.
Alienation, there you go.
You talk about the tribes.
Yeah.
But some people feel alienated from the country or the world or the workforce or anything.
Yeah, yep. And, you know, we also, in the US, the big word is always going to be freedom. And so we should be free to choose whatever it is we choose. And I'm fine with all that as long as they're simultaneously happy to accept whatever the consequences are of the choices that are being made. And so that's where it gets a little bit touchy, but you know.
Yeah, I respond to this idea that you say, well, at some point you forget as a movement where you stand for from the start. So it becomes a trick or a action just to be part of that movement, apart from the original reasons for starting the movement.
Right.
But see, I think
Yeah.
it speaks to the power of narrative and how that plays into human perception. And you start putting that on top of the emotion that's connected to it and how you're, sensationalized, particular situation. Now you can literally be the product of amygdala hijacking, where now you're part of this. Think about January 6th. People were, some may have just been standing in the crowd and got caught up in the moment, right? But
Absolutely. Yeah.
you just, it's the narrative, and when you put that on top of like public health crises, that's what bothered me the most about the whole vaccination thing. Public health should not be politicized like that, because then people don't know what to believe, and that creates its own problem.
Yep. Very much so. Very much so. And then yeah, go right ahead.
Appreciative inquiry.
Yes, there's a version of positive psychology applied to business.
Yeah. So how would we integrate that in this dialogue?
Well, I think that appreciative inquiry is a very powerful technique for certain situations at certain times. How many of you are familiar with appreciative inquiry?
Yeah, I am.
I am.
Yeah. So the fundamental belief behind it is that anything that's wrong can be solved with everything that's right. So let's really take time to take inventory, appreciate what it is we have, and kind of work at an issue from that. But even if you go to the appreciative inquiry texts, one of the things that it says right up front is that it's not supposed to be a panacea for every situation, everything. It's for certain things. But one thing it's not for is problem solving. So have you guys taken any appreciative inquiry stuff specifically about problem solving?
No, the way that I have used it and been involved with it is brainstorming and taking a look at visioning and strategy. You can see that as a form of problem solving, high level problem solving, and that you're looking at the best possible alternatives using the strengths. It sort of falls in line with the strengths finder concepts, but the strengths of the organization or the group or whatever, and use the strengths as a way to address problems as opposed to looking at gaps. But we know that ultimately, from tension management and plain experience, that only goes so far.
Right. And see, that's why that's why we have the path of self-discovery, because the appreciative inquiry is all about really the green step and a bit of the yellow step. So it's about coming up with creative thoughts about what could be and how it could be, and doing a good, thorough, positive inventory of whatever the assets all happen to be. And so I was in a client that was very much a fan of appreciative inquiry, and I brought up that sooner or later we have to address the black step, because the black step is about reality, and all the appreciative inquiry we want is not going to make these obstacles go away. So let's at least make sure that the appreciative inquiry is put to the test. Whatever comes out of the appreciative inquiry, for saying like, here's the best possible solution, great. Let's put it up against the obstacle and ask ourselves, will it actually work? And they did not like that at all. And I said, whether you like it or not doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So, right, I mean, this obstacle actually exists. It's not going to disappear because it doesn't fit into the methodology you guys are trying to apply to things. So I actually had to go to the textbook and read to them a passage from Appreciative Inquiry that just said, this is not something that is supposed to be used for, everything that ails you. So anyway, Tim, that probably took it a very different direction than you were going in, but
no, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
And I particularly like and relate to the way Kathleen positioned that as well. So that's what I'm familiar with as well.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful approach. It fits in with the green step most easily and a bit on the yellow as well. So I kind of love it. You know, we're coming up at the top of the hour, and I wanted to just share something with you guys that will resonate with this. Particularly if we think about what's happening, at least in the US culture, and I know that it's spilling into other Western cultures around the world. But in 2 days' time, we're having Thanksgiving. Now, Thanksgiving is a greatly, greatly, greatly misunderstood and poorly attributed holiday. So we were all raised, Joseph, I'm sure you've heard plenty of this as well, that it was all about the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag Indian tribe and blah, 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 having their first feast and on and on and on and on and on, right? We've all kind of heard this, and we've seen the Pilgrim outfits and all that sort of stuff. But do you guys know that that is not the Thanksgiving holiday that we are actually celebrating in 2 days? So how many of you know where Thanksgiving, the holiday we're about to celebrate, actually comes from?
I mean, yes. I do know from from what I know of history and also my experience working with New England Native Americans, that the Thanksgiving concept is considered a national day of mourning for Indians.
That's right.
Absolutely.
But you know, whether the Thanksgiving piece came from Plymouth Rock, or whether it came from Jamestown, or whether it came, whatever, I'm not sure, but it certainly is not the myth that we celebrate.
That's right. That's right. Well, the actual holiday, does anyone even know when it became an official holiday? See, this is the fun part for me. It became a holiday in 1863. Abraham Lincoln proposed that we have a day of Thanksgiving. And it had nothing whatsoever to do. In his proclamation, there's no mention whatsoever of anything going all the way back. He just said that we've got a lot to be thankful for, but one of the things is that we've also had a lot of people who have lost their lives, because of Civil War and all that sort of stuff, that we've got parts of our population that have been oppressed and all that. And so he gets very religious in this. It must be a good 15 lines long in the proclamation, but that's what it's really all about. And so I think it's really going to be interesting as we start to hear the protests about Thanksgiving. Are they protesting Thanksgiving as Abraham Lincoln framed it, or are they opposing the Thanksgiving that is part of legend, mythology? I'm sure it all really happened. Make no mistake about it. But is that the holiday we're really celebrating, or are we just using a lot of the visual kind of anchors, again, the pilgrim hats and all that sort of stuff? But that's got nothing to do with what the official U.S. holiday is really all about. Thoughts about that? Yeah.
Well, we learned something new today.
Yeah, go right ahead, Joseph. Yeah, we did, David. Yeah.
We don't have Thanksgiving, but we have Sinterklaas, and we have the same issues around this feast.
Oh, I'm sure you do. Those of you who don't know about Sinterklaas is a particularly Black individual.
Mm-hmm. No, his workers.
Oh, his workers. Right. No, right. Yeah. And so what do you guys call his main worker?
Duarte Pete.
Black Pete. Yeah, you've got a much bigger problem.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm sure they didn't consider the origins of the festival. All right.
Well, right. Yeah, and even talking about neutralizing the language in the last minute. Linda and I are part of the French club here. We speak enough French to get by. Well, recently there's a movement in France to introduce a non-gender specific pronoun, and French, like a lot of other Romance languages, have gender-specific nouns. So every noun there is has its own unique gender. And there's no rhyme or reason a lot of times. For example, the word for mustache in French is masculine, but the word for beard is barbe is feminine. It's la barbe. That's a feminine word, beard. So I don't know where that all came from, but nevertheless it is. And so they want to get rid of the masculine pronoun il and the feminine pronoun elle, and instead have an in-between il. And there's this group of people, they're called the Immortals. There are 40 of them, and they are part of the Académie Française. Their whole job is to protect the language. And they take it very, very seriously. And so they're going to have to, in order to have EL be introduced into the language, they have to go through, I don't know how many centuries of tradition to even introduce a new word into the official language. So as we move up the spiral, disruptions are happening in all kinds of ways with our holidays, our language, it's touching everything. And at a certain point in time, you kind of go like, well, how is what we're talking about here apply to all that? The positivity, the toxic, the negativity, the toxic. I think there's a lot going on that this is helping us to put a better frame around. So anyway, all that said, I wish you all a very joyous Thanksgiving, however you choose to define and celebrate it. So there
Thank you. Same to you.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody. Talk to you next week. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.